eraser. Pen.
Yes, ma'am.
Yep.
Yeah, pretty much like Ashley.
Okay. All right, so this is my plan for today. We have a couple of slides. I've cut down the information on the last few slides to try to get them finished quickly because we have an activity on practicing your observation plans, and that's 5% of your grade. So I want to make sure we've got plenty of time to at least get going on that, all right? And then remember, please, that Friday will be a review session, and Monday is the next exam. Okay? All right, so let's finish off chapter 9. We've looked at reaching, we've looked at grasping, we've looked at catching. Okay, now we're going to take a look at how we think the brain manages catching. Help if I started on the right slide. So if you come from an information processing perspective, then the idea of how the brain intercepts an object is very computer-based. All right, so when I was in school, my background before I went to grad school was very information processing, and so instinctively, because that's what I first learned, that's where I tend to go, right? And when we think about that, when I think about it, what the information processing theories would say is that you receive sensory information from the environment, right? So you see the ball. That sensory information is transmitted to the brain, and the brain makes calculations based on all the sensory information of where the ball is going to finish up and therefore where to put your hand. Right? So it's very computer oriented. The textbook and ecological perspective take a view thinking about the interaction between the perception and the action that's initiated. All right? So the idea, if you take a perception action approach, is that there are characteristics between the person and the environment that are involved in catching that stay pretty constant. Okay? The first one, so under this idea, instead of the brain having to receive the information and run these mathematical calculations, from an ecological approach, it's not necessary to calculate because the possibilities for movement are provided directly by the environment, right? So that idea that we talked about a few weeks ago of affordance, my perception of the environment, my perception of important information in the environment allows me the opportunity to act. So from their perspective, it's more about a direct relationship between that perception and moving than it is about the brain going, oh, okay, the angle of the flight is this and the speed of the ball. So it's not a right or a wrong, it's just a different way of thinking about it. Right? So one of the characteristics that is pretty stable is what they call invariance. And that's stable patterns of movement within the system. So I'm not going to spend too much time on that idea because it's mathematically quite confusing even for me. And I think that it's more a graduate concept.
So will that be in the test?
I don't plan for it to be if I remember to review the exam and go back and take it out if it's there.
Stop it.
All right. But having said that, if you are a ball player, there's a lot of very cool information in this chapter about how baseball fielders, softball fielders, cricket fielders in particular, but also obviously football players, anyone who's catching a ball. But in particular, baseball, softball, cricket, where the ball could fly very high and be coming down, there's some really cool research on those ideas about stable patterns. We know, for example, that a projectile always follows a parabola, right? That's a stable pattern in that system. If there is a ball in flight, it is following a parabola, right? On top of that, there's lots of other information and some quite cool ideas of how you perceive that parabola. An easier concept, I think, but also a very constant part of catching is what we call the optical array. And the optical array expands or contracts depending upon whether the object is moving towards you or away from you, or obviously whether the object is stationary and you are approaching it or backing off. Okay? The optical array is the pattern, the visual stimulus that falls on the retina in the back of your eye. And after this exam, when we start looking at perceptual information in a bit more detail, we'll look a bit more at the eye. But the retina sits in the back of your eye and it's full of the sensory receptors that pick up visual information and then send that to your brain. So if I am watching a ball and it's coming towards me, the picture of the ball on the retina gets bigger as the ball gets closer and gets smaller as the ball moves away if I throw the ball. Does that make sense? All right. So one idea is that it's possible that the rate of change of that expansion or constriction on the retina is the information that allows you to plan for the arrival of the ball. So you perceive the environment directly and you're able to plan for where the ball is going to arrive. Right? There's a lot of work being done on these kinds of ideas because we don't know enough about the brain to pin it down. So we're starting to make some inroads into how could that occur directly rather than relying on a central controller to make the calculation. Don't worry about that one. Don't worry about that one. All right. So then, if we're teaching catching and it's this complicated, how do we think children learn to end up in the right place? Right? Because they obviously can't do that when they're young. the research tends to look at children, but I think you could replace children with inexperienced catchers, because you would find possibly less dramatic but very similar problems with a teenager who doesn't do a lot of catching. Right? So if I take the information processing view, then we say that the errors that I make every time I am not in the right place to catch the ball provide sensory feedback to the brain, and the next time it attempts the skill, it refines the calculation that it made. If we take the perception action point of view, then what we think is that children, inexperienced catchers, have to subconsciously discover the relationship between the flight of the ball and where they need to go to, right? This stable relationship. So, typo. So, perhaps children, inexperienced people are learning, subconsciously learning that relationship when they're standing still, because they're still watching a ball fly to them. And even if they're not catching with their hands, if the ball is just landing in their arms or they're scooping the ball, they still were in the right place given the flight of the ball, right? If we toss it well. Right? So that might be one of the things they're learning when we're just standing there tossing the ball. We might not like them scooping it up and catching it with their arms rather than their hands, but it could be a very beneficial practice, experience for their brain to understand ball flight. So what is clear when you look at catching as a skill is that experience is really, really important. And it's important to provide experiences and practice that allow someone to go from here, that you can't start learning to catch by throwing a moving ball and expecting them to move there and get it. That's too much information, too much work for the brain to cope all at one time. We have to simplify it. It's a hugely complicated skill. So parents, teachers, coaches, depending what age group you're working with, have many options for manipulating constraints that provide information, right? The distance that I toss the ball from, the size of the ball, the color, the weight, the speed. Do I throw one fast ball and then one slow ball? Because we see that if we throw the ball at a consistent speed, it's much easier for inexperienced people to judge what they've got to do. If I add too much variability, it starts to get very tricky for them. Okay. If you're working with a slightly older, more cognizant population, you can start to provide actual cues that give them important sources of information they should be looking for, right? So you can say to them, watch the ball go up and come down. Or when the ball gets high, you have to be moving your feet. Right? I wouldn't do that with our population on the playground because they're not aware enough and their language isn't strong enough yet for them to put those two pieces of information together. Right? It's all about the visual cues that we offer with our age group. But if you're working with middle school or you're working with adults, then actually telling them what to look for helps a lot. So if you're an individual who catches, if you play games where catching is involved and you continue to play those games, catching seems to be relatively stable for your age group and into your mid-adult years. Right? When we look at older adulthood, we really don't have very much information at all. It appears that if they're experienced catchers and they know the relationship and the patterns, that they're pretty consistent. If they get less consistent, it's often because of structural or functional constraints that are slowing them down. Right? So maybe they have an ankle injury or a sore hip. They know where the ball is going, but they can't get there quickly enough to intercept successfully. Right? So it's not the actual ability to catch, it's a structural constraint that causes them to miss. Right? Older adults are a little less accurate and more variable, particularly if they don't have experience or if they're sedentary. But there is research that indicates they can improve with regular practice and good teaching, and even possibly to the extent that a beginner, younger adult would improve. Particularly if they've got good vision or glasses that give them good vision, then the ability to learn to catch seems quite strong, even in older adults. So if you're working in a rec center, for example, or you're playing with grandparents, then helping them learn to catch might be a lot of fun. A lot of the research you have to take, be a little cautious as you're reading the research on catching, because a lot of it is, particularly if you go back to the 80s and the early 90s, a lot of it is coincidence timing, coincidence anticipation tasks that were done in a lab. So transferring it out into the real world, there's going to be other constraints that are playing a role. So things might not happen in the real world exactly the way the research said they happened in the study, because there's a lot more going on. It's one of the reasons why I like doing my research in the real world, because that's where we're teaching, right? Okay, we're going to skip driving and piloting, but please take a look at it because it's really very cool. Particularly when you are in a culture where people drive into their 90s. Right? So it's actually a very interesting piece of info, but it's very easy to read, so I'm going to let you do that so we can get on with that playing. Okay? Any questions on those ideas? As I say, for those of you who play a game where balls are involved, this chapter should be very fun, right? Because it's all about how you do what you do so well. Okay? All right. Now, what we're going to do is an activity that will help you practice the idea of the observation plan that we've talked about over the last few chapters. All right? This worksheet has 5% attached to it, so please take it seriously. Right? Doesn't mean we can't play and we can't have fun, but you still want to be sensible and thoughtful about what you're doing. All right? I have a copy for everybody My intention is that you get into your groups that we did for our role play and work as a group, but if anybody would prefer to just do their own thing, that is up to you. If you would prefer to work with a group and all help each other out, create an observation plan, then the group gets the same score for the piece of work. All right? So however you want to play it is up to you. Nice shirt.
Thank you. You guys should try it.
That's it. I hear you're beating up on your friends now.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Thank you.
Here we go.
I asked him about how his knee was. He's like, oh, it's a little swollen.
Oh, look at that. Perfect. All right, so when you look at the worksheet, all right, the first thing you've got to do is pick the skill that you're going to create the observation plan for. It cannot be one of the skills that we have an observation plan for, right? The good thing about that is that that means you've got a lot of flexibility for how you create the observation plan, because if it's a skill we don't have one for, then there's not a true right or wrong, right? You have to do something really completely off task for it to be wrong, okay? Does that make sense? All right, so you're going to pick a skill, tell me what the skill is, and then you're going to decide what the major components for that skill are going to be, all right? I would prefer at least 3. You don't have to have 4. You're going to have to make a good argument, because we clearly have observation plans that only have 2 components in the book, but they're looking at very simple skills. So you're going to have a good argument if you only do 2 components. I'm not saying you can't only do 2, but I would expect you to argue why. Okay? So you're going to pick your components, and you're going to put the action for that component. So is it a hand action? Is it a foot action? Is it watching the ball? Is it trunk rotate? Right? Whatever the component is. And then you're going to ask your first question. So remember that the idea is to create a sequence for that component that goes from the equivalent of a stage 1 to a stage 2, and we're going to make it easy by asking a question I can answer yes, no to. Right? So if it's foot action, depending on the skill you're talking about, do the feet move? Yes or no, for example. All right? So you can use your examples in the book, there's lots of them, to help you work out how to phrase the question you want to ask. Yes, no question, right? If the answer's yes, usually, occasionally you'll see it if the answer is no, but typically if the answer is yes, then I need the next question in order to get to the next level of the skill. Alright? Question. Alright, so, for those of you that want to work with your groups, Group 1 was Toby, Tori, Blazer and Ben. Group 2 is Morgan, Riley's not here today, and Joe. So if one of the group 1 people want to shift over to group 2, that's fine. Group 3 is Bailey, Jose, and Johnny. Group 4 is Akeem, Sophia, and Gabriel. Group 5 is Kai, Nancy, Daniel R, and Gerardo. Group 6 is Isaiah, Taylor, and Colton. And group 7 is Julian, Sergio, Daniel V, and Grant. Alright, so you can get into your groups, use your books, pick a skill, start creating. We've got 20 minutes. If we can't get done, because it is quite a lot to do, you need to let me know whether you want to do it at home or whether you would like me to create a little bit of class time after the exam to finish it off. Alright? Okay, off you go.
I guess you would have to because you have a leg. That's like a collection and body. Yeah, like so we like something
Yes.
Leg, body,
Yeah.
foot. You know?
Just if the group has changed from what it was that I pulled out, just let me know so that I
So,
give.
scriptures. Was that
No, this is just like an example. This is just an example. So, like, what do you like? We're doing kick.
He's saying that the previous.
You just can't be catching it.
Yeah.
It's catching on here.
Yeah.
Yeah, like that next one. Yeah.
You can do like pitching or like these skill guys. Yeah. So, well, I think we got the leg is supposed to do this, such as like this one says the arms need to be adapt. This one,
Right. The leg flexes first.
Yeah. Is your leg like pulled back? So you're ready to cock down there and just
You don't have to have four unless there's a very obvious.
Is your leg? Wind up and get ready.
There you go.
So does the leg flex or wind up for the kick?
Yeah.
Climbing hand, like climbing on the rock. That would be interesting.
So component one is not like you don't actually do it, right? So step one.
No, component one, you've got to give it a name.
We're gonna put that.
Oh, so it's gonna be like arm action and body.
So like this one, you can put.
Okay.
This one here you put no push the ball, like, so like it just stood right here and then like pull back and just push.
Like toe pull.
Yeah. So like no, just push.
Give it a go. It's a tricky one.
Push the ball.
Without leg extension.
It would be fun to have a go at it, I think. Because what I'm looking for, guys, is that you understand the idea of the observation plan. All right? You don't have to be perfectly correct on your questions, or I mean, you could be really off on the question if it doesn't relate to the previous question, right? But I'm not looking for, oh, well, that was a silly thing to say, or that was a silly. What I want to see, because I think it's an important skill, if you're going to be teachers and coaches, is that you understand the idea of components and development. Right? Because we're very good as teachers at using a biomechanical approach and saying throwing involves a step and a backswing, trunk rotation, throw. Step one, step two, step three. Step one is step. Step two is arm swing. Step three is release. Step four is follow through. But that's a biomechanical skill breakdown. That is not skill development. Right? So the goal of this play is for you to clearly identify that you understand the idea that different components develop in different ways. Right? Does that make sense? Okay.
Yes, that's what they consider.
I don't know why it's and then if you're like question, and then if it's wrong,
Would another one be like? Another one be like?
Yeah, the next component is start.
Plant foot, spot ball, or like it's gonna be like that's what I'm saying. So like if you get that one, like the leg cocked back, you also gotta like, so this is the ball here, you also gotta have it like right there by you. If you're behind it, then you have to like extend out far to keep it.
So that's for small step 2?
Yeah, so no, so middle step 2 would be, yes would be, yes he is like honestly, I think
You could put,
unless you do another question,